on a serious note, and we're not just pointing the finger at your England and England fans, but a very unwelcome trend of behaviour over in France in recent days, and sadly England fans have been at the heart of it. And this morning, one of the most respected correspondents in rugby, Stephen Jones of The Time, Stephen is over there, wrote about it. Why? Because he witnessed it. This boorish antisocial minority, it has to be said, who shame England rugby. This was Stephen talking to me earlier about what he saw.
I wouldn't have written it had I just seen a couple of little things that you see every day in everyday life, Jim. But this was just a bit beyond that. The first sort of anecdote I told was on being on a late night tram in Nice from the stadium back to the city, and the behaviour there was absolutely horrendous. If there had been police on, there would have been about 20 arrests, I say. There was horrendously loud singing, absolutely filthy lyrics. People removing their underpants, and on the tram, there were kind of families. There was a Japanese family who'd obviously come over to follow their team, and it was just incredible. And it was infuriating as well. I mean, people were trying to get off the tram at every stop just to avoid it, and terrified, really. Single girls were getting off, and at the end, there was only these idiots on the tram because everyone had left. It's rare in rugby, Jim, but it was just horrendous.
And are we talking only England fans here, Stephen?
It's difficult to say, but these were certainly England fans because it was an England-Japan game and they had all their kit on, white kit on. I mean, I'm sure at the start of the day they looked a good sight because they had I think it was sort of schoolboy kit on. By the end of the day, they were an absolute menace, and the things they were doing would have caused arrest, and they certainly visibly upset people who were on the train.
Rugby seems always to have remained above any kind of yobbish behaviour like this. Is that changing? If so, what's driving it?
It's changing a little bit, Jim. I mean, I don't think that, on the weekend there's the two semis. It's not going to be a mass riot or anything, but it is changing. I think, first of all, because the world's changing. B, there is such a lovely lot of nice people still around. But C, these late kickoffs are just damning it because you're kicking off at 9 o'clock out here, 8 o'clock your time. But, I mean, if you've come in getting up at sort of 8 o'clock and 9 o'clock, you've got 12 hours to fill if you're a tourist and if you're a fan. And what you're going to do, you're going to have a few drinks. And by the time the kickoff comes along, and by the time the All Blacks have done their hacker, it's almost the next day. So there's no question that the late kickoffs have made watching rugby a lot less pleasurable than it was.
You concerned about the weekend ahead, Stephen? You concerned about what you might see?
I think it'll be okay this weekend because I think people have been put on their guard. But again, it's 9 o'clock kickoff to Friday, 9 o'clock kickoff Saturday. There is the potential, but it has been pretty well covered over here, on the news shows and news review shows, etc. So I think probably we will be okay. But if the people we've come across in Nice and Marseille are still about, then there might be trouble of some sort. There's a heck of a lot of police on duty now with guns, which you'd never seen at rugby matches before. And obviously there's a different element now because there's things happening in the world that you've got to make secure. But it's changed a bit, and the reason I wrote it is I don't want to say in 10 years' time when everybody's fighting everyone, Jim. I wish I'd written it 10 years ago.
Stephen, I've heard you many times talk about the sport. You're an award-winning rugby writer. You're disgusted by this, aren't you?
Yeah, I am. I was disgusted by what happened there. And, I think I said it in the piece, Jim, there was a Japanese family there, two little kids and two mum and dad looking utterly bewildered, as if it wasn't happening. And people with, no underpants on, like 2 yards from their face. And that was despicable. And I didn't have any language to share with the Japanese, but as I said, me and quite a few other people just saw them off the bus and just said sorry. And I hope they understand what sorry meant.
That was Stephen Jones opening up a bit more on what he's written in the Times today. And if you want to read more, then it's on page 60 69 of the Times of Boorish Jobs who cast shame on England fans. Now, the first thing you're going to say to me, Simon, is
Here we go again.
Why are we picking on England fans? This is Stephen Jones, who travels the world covering rugby.
Yeah. He's got on one tram. He's seen some England fans behaving badly. Is this unique to us? I'm not excusing the behaviour, by the way. If that's the behaviour that's been exhibited in that environment, it's poor. But as we have seen time and time and time again, we are not alone when it comes to our fans and supporters of our sports behaving in a fashion that's unpalatable.
But
we are alone.
These are scenes that rugby is not used to seeing.
So, well, in what terms? In terms of he's equating the fact that police are carrying guns. That's got nothing to do with rugby fans.
In terms of yobbish behaviour.
Right. Well, the world has changed. Are we now
But you don't believe what he was saying?
I believe that we have a propensity in this country to self-flagellate, to start with the prerequisite of saying it's the English disease, right? When it's not the English disease, it's everyone's disease. Everyone behaves badly, except we're the ones that are prepared to take it upon ourselves to denigrate ourselves, and I abhor it. Now, I'm not denying his experiences, but I wondered if he travelled on a game after, because he'd have no reason to, but I wonder if he did, if he travelled on a game after the South Africans had played, or XYZ Nation had played, and sat there and seen anything akin to it. If he hasn't, and they've all been absolutely wonderful citizens, then by all means start this race to the bottom about how English fans
He's saying
are.
it's a problem for the sport.
He's
saying it's a problem for the sport.
But it's not a problem for the sport, it's a problem for no, the sport itself isn't suffering from it. It's our dreadful fans. It's only us, only we do it. If it is a problem for the sport, he will extrapolate it and tell you that this is a growing trend across a variety of nations. It isn't just us, but there is a propensity, and I dislike it intensely, to judge us by a set of standards that no one else is judged by. No, they're absolutely right. We should be calling out to account. But the next thing it will be is it's always English rugby fans. And it won't be always English rugby fans, because we start with this little kernel, this little Norwich,
did you hear him
and we
say
build up from there.
in his discussion with me, and this is unique to England rugby support? He didn't say that.
I didn't hear him say that. It's I didn't hear him say
that. An eyewitness account of what he saw
about English rugby fans, and the example that he's using.
Well, the ones he saw
as English rugby fans,
and it has to be emphasised.
And I didn't hear him say
a minority.
I didn't hear, and that's fine then, because there's always going to be a minority of idiots in every walk of life.
I know this is totally unusual, Jim, because England rugby fans, as you know, the world over, are splendid chaps who demonstrate that on a regular basis. He's hardly going to come out and say that. He's telling us what he saw.
But he's telling us that there's a cult. He's starting it, with all due respect to the article, as a call to action that ultimately there is a propensity or a likelihood that this could be something that becomes a problem, rather than an isolated instance with a bunch of buffoons that do not represent the sport in any shape or form and are unique to that situation. That's not quite what he's saying, though, is it?
The thing is, he's been to many Rugby World Cups, and this time around, he's seen something different. He's seeing something that he hasn't seen before, and that's why he's highlighting it. The real journey he was on was shocking. It terrified some passengers.
Lots of things in society.
The group, about 8 or 9, stood in the middle of a packed carriage, roaring out songs, and their enunciation was such that it was blatantly easy to recognise.
He's offended. Well, hang on.
I can't go on to tell you what it was.
I don't suppose the Japanese people, I don't know if he knows how they know the Japanese, maybe because their team had played. Right? But the point is this: he can mind read, can he? He can understand what people are thinking. The fact that he can hear these ridiculously nonsensical songs that are regularly sung in other sports, and we don't particularly want to see it sung in any sport. My concern, insofar as I have a concern, is not to extrapolate. It's not to turn this as a launch point.
But he's not doing that.
Oh, that's what they do. That's how it becomes part of the vernacular.
He's not doing that.
By pointing it out and saying, "Oh, I'm way for this sport," rather than saying, he's turned it into a bleeding article. X amount of people on a tube or a subway.
All he's saying is, what I saw, I don't want to turn it into something bigger.
Fine. But it's already turned it into something bigger because he's written it in one of the most credible newspapers in this country, rather than go, do you know what? I've been out in France for 2 weeks and I've seen it every time I've got on a train. This is an article I must write. He's seen a scenario of people behaving badly, which we all have in every walk of life, walking down the street, and equated it potentially to the demise of rugby. Now, if we'd have seen it all tournament, he comes back from the rugby tournament and gone, I'm ashamed of English fans. I have seen this everywhere I've gone. I've seen this repeatedly and endlessly, and it has to be drawn attention to. He's seen an isolated instance and turned it into a potential subject matter that could be problematic and viewed as, because every other country will suddenly say, hey, nasty, it's the English fans, look at them over there.
Yeah.
That's my objection.
You saw that in social media, though, last weekend, didn't you? Some of the England fans fighting in the stands. I'm not picking on England here because I'm not English, but some of them chucking some lad down a few rows in front.
And I've also seen
it should be highlighted. It should be highlighted
contextually and in balance.
Listen to some of the messages we're getting in.
Go on,
Jim, I was on the Eurostar coming back from the Rugby World Cup way back in 2007.
16 years ago.
This has gone on for a long time.
That's one example.
A carriage scattered by some of the most obnoxious England rugby fans I have ever seen or heard. Lee in Stourbridge. Jim, I ran a pub in the town I'm from, Stourbridge. The worst lot for disorder were the rugby lot, Simon's lot, posh boys getting out of control. I could have Wolves, Blues, West Brom or Villa fans in there. Never have a problem. Rugby has always brought a problem. The posh boys are the guys who bring it. So there you go. What are we hearing there? Now, Stephen Jones is saying
that's a huge...
If we're not careful...
deluge of information.
If we're not careful,
situations.
Rugby and the posh boys, of whom you're one, is going to get tagged by this.
Well, given I went to comprehensive school...
Yeah.
Was born 100 yards away from the football club that I owned and anything but posh just because I'm able to express myself every now and again. That's the first inconsistency. The second is we've got two examples. And yes, I do agree that there is a culture around rugby that has the behaviour that I don't particularly... You see rugby guys in pubs drinking themselves to Palukville, peeing in their own glasses, drinking their own urine and thinking it's all fun.
All right,
but we're talking about
the
culture of the sport is far better than the football sport because of respect for authority. And these are... We could sit here and you and I could produce a list as long as our arm about football fans' behaviour. And we could date them, and we could actually across all.
I agree.
Across all. In rugby, we've got two examples, and a fellow on a
Don't.
train. And
no,
a
we don't.
fellow on a
In
train.
rugby, we have one of the most, and you poo-pooed me, but you won't do it again. One of the most respected rugby writers in the business, Stephen Jones of the Times, the boorish yobs who cast shame on England fans.
I couldn't care less what he is and what he isn't. What I'm concerned about is the idea that it gets turned into something that it's not. These
he's not doing
isolated
that. Be
instances.
concerned about what Stephen Jones was saying. This is what he was saying. Listen.
There was horrendously loud singing, absolutely filthy lyrics. People removing their underpants, and on the tram. There were kind of families. There was a Japanese family who'd obviously come over to follow their team, and it was just incredible. And it was infuriating as well. I mean, people were trying to get off the tram at every stop just to avoid it, and terrified, really. It's changed a bit, and the reason I wrote it is I don't want to say in 10 years' time when everybody's fighting everyone, Jim. I wish I'd written it 10 years ago.
And that's why he's written it now.
Yes, you're right.
I don't know about you, but when
you're
I
right.
take
I'm sure his words will stop these fans from doing it. And
when I take a tram journey, I tend to keep my underwear on. He's making the point, Simon. There were good people. There were good people.
Why don't you do it in the studio then?
There were good people on board that tram coming back from the same rugby match.
How do you know there were good people?
Because he's saying they were offended by it.
Right. Listen, how does he know they were offended by it? We couldn't even. He understood the words.
Well, let me tell you, I'm no Mary Whitehouse figure here, but it does come over to me
exactly.
that there was bad behaviour here.
Behaved like Braveheart most of the time. The point of this is that we are talking about individual experiences. My concern, I'm not decrying or denying what he's saying about this individual experience. I want to put a demarcation point down so that when he does write an article in 10 years' time, it isn't just related to the English J.R. Hartley.
He's not saying
on
that.
Fly fishing.
He's saying, well, I don't understand why you're not getting this. He's saying that behaviour like this, like it or not just with England fans, but with rugby fans in general, is creeping into rugby.
His reference point is English fans.
Correct.
And so what he might want to do is avail himself of a few tram rides with other fans and say, this is a malaise. This is not just English fans. This is going on in rugby.
Or should he?
Well, why not?
All right.
If you're going to write a rounded
article.
So
he phones the Times Sports
as an award-winning
I won't be
journalist.
with you tonight. I'm trying to get a tram. I'm trying to get on it with
some
some Argentinian fans.
He might be a Greisler for all I know.
Yeah.
He might be someone that really appreciates his time on trains.
Yeah. You don't deny, though, that this is a pain in the ass, this kind of behaviour when it's witnessed. If you're at any tournament and you witness something like this, and it happens to be rugby, and sorry, it happens to be your beloved England fans. Posh fans.
I don't know what they are, neither does he.
No.
The point that we take these really ridiculous observations like everyone's posh because they support a particular sport. In this instance, the behaviour should be called out in terms of a necessity to look at it. But when you're writing an article and suggesting this is something that happens in a sport, if it's an isolated instance, do you think it's worthy of a big article in a massive publication like The Times? I question that. if it's a set of behaviour, we've had two people come in. One that said it was a problem in 2007, 16 years ago, and another that says in his boozer that rugby fans are the worst. And I'll accept them at face value. But that's hardly a deluge of information, and that's what I'm pushing back against. I'm not denying what the fella's written. I'm not criticising his credentials. I have just seen us do this in this country. I've watched us in big publications over the years be quite prepared to embrace and wrap our arms around the fact that it's the English disease, while the Dutch and the French and the Italians are laughing behind their hands while we're getting banned from Europe and our teams are getting vilified and our supporters, and sometimes rightly so.
Yeah, and also sometimes rightly so. People make comments here and I will react to them. And Phil in Leamington, I will react to this. Simon, please remind Jim of the Scotland fans who mocked and jostled Eddie Jones after they beat England a few years ago.
Yeah.
And that happened on a train.
That was disgusting. That was a malaise. That was a stain on Scottish rugby. And we should be writing about that endlessly. The Daily Record needs to be writing a regular column on Scottish rugby fans.
No, it was written about at the time.
And Mawson needs...
and at the time, it was shown to be what it absolutely was.
Scottish fans.
A ridiculous
at their
moment
worst.
When a number of Scotland fans disgraced.
Going back to 1977 when
Scotland fans' reputation.
Dumped.
Not just rugby fans, but fans everywhere. Because Jones put up with a lot that day and should not have had to tolerate it.
But do you know why it was written? Do you know what that was written?
We've addressed it.
That was written about that because it was directly relational to one of the protagonists in the game, Eddie Jones.
Yeah.
That couldn't be ignored.
Yeah.
That couldn't be in any shape or form not written about and said as a problematic situation. But no one said, we're worried about it 10 years' time. I'm going to be writing an article about every coach being harassed by rugby fans. Did it?
Right.
Did it?
Do me a favour. The next time you and I travel in the same tram, which we're bound to do, keep your drawers on. 12:15.
talkSPORT Breakfast with Alan Brazil. Thursday and Friday morning, 6 till 10. On AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.